Hail travelers, and welcome to the Knight's Realm. Here in the realm of Camelot, I, the Guardian Knight, venture deep into the archives of popular culture and entertainment to bring you all my own perspective on such matters. The character of Arcee was introduced to Transformers fans back in 1986 in the Transformers the movie. She was a member of the new main lineup of Autobot leads along with Hot Rod or Rodimus Prime, Ultra Magnus, Blur, Cup, Wheelie, and Springer. Each of these characters has gone on to be a mainstay of the franchise, with most continuities featuring a version of them, or at least a mention or homage. Of these characters, however, none have changed as often or as drastically as Arcee. Perhaps the greatest change to her character came in Transformers Prime, where for the first time, she shed the bright pink and white color scheme in favor of a dark blue and metallic pink one. It was not cosmetic changes alone, however, as Arcee's character underwent quite the overhaul. One that, in my opinion, was welcome. Now join me as we delve deep beneath the castle and begin our quest. The character of Arcee in G1 could barely be called a character. Unlike Alita 1, Chromia, Firestar, and Moonracer, all of whom had been introduced earlier in Season 2, Arcee had few defining characteristics outside of being the girl. No G1 character is particularly deep, to be fair, but they are mostly distinct. Hot Rod is young and wants to prove himself, Ironhide is battle-hardened and reckless, Bumblebee is kind and often underestimated, Prowl is by the book, Jazz loves music and is easygoing. Alita 1 is battle-weary and devoted to her soldiers, Chromia is impetuous and strong-willed, Optimus is gentle and honorable. Archetypal characters all, but a viewer can tell what they are about. Arcee's characteristics are very much stereotypically, quote-unquote, feminine ones. Motherly, nurturing, emotional, peaceful, etc. None of these characteristics are a problem in a vacuum, to be clear. Optimus shares many similar ones, as does Bumblebee. If Prime is the Autobots' dad, then Alita is their mom. The issue lies in the fact that Arcee is a female stereotype. She has no character outside of being feminine. For contrast, take the character of Katara from Avatar. Katara has many of the same characteristics. She's nurturing, she's very much the team mom, so to speak. She's incredibly emotional. She's classically feminine in design and role, serving as the heart of Team Avatar. However, Katara is also fierce. She has a quick and ironically fiery temper. She's devoted to her family and friends. She's sarcastic. She's got a dark side to her. She's more than just sweet, demure, traditionally feminine character. That's certainly her archetype, as Aang is the hero archetype, Sokka is the comic sidekick archetype, Toph is the tomboy archetype, and Zuko is the dark hero archetype. Yet each and every one of them is more than that. Aang is a pacifist, where traditional heroes like Luke Skywalker or King Arthur are usually generals, warriors, or kings. Sokka has far more depth than a typical comedy relief character. He's more than just jokes and slapstick, though there is plenty of that to go around. Zuko is really a sweet kid at heart, and is only as harsh as he is because of his circumstances. In many ways, all three of the main male characters are gentler than Katara. Can I really say anything similar about G1 Arcee? No. She's purely an archetype, and that is to her detriment. Even the other G1 characters, while also being archetypal, aren't gendered archetypes. Even the other fembots. A hero or leader or fun-loving or supervillain archetypal character is ultimately harmless. Children's stories have been filled with them since time immemorial. However, the quote-unquote girl archetype is one that I have personally come to loathe over the years. Foremost because the quote-unquote feminine traits it espouses are not exclusive to women. As mentioned earlier, Bumblebee is a very gentle, soft-spoken, kind character, as is Aang. Optimus is based around the concept of someone strong enough to be gentle. Characters like Aragorn, Frodo, and Sam are very emotional, openly crying, hugging, and nurturing others. Even a seeming stone-cold killer like Geralt of Rivia is a very sensitive character. He's certainly gentler than Yennefer, at least. And beyond that, this archetype has a tendency to force female characters into a very particular box, which is why the best examples of this archetype are the ones that subvert it, like the aforementioned Katara. G1 Arcee, however, plays it straight, and is very much the weaker for it, and future versions of her character were little better. Arcee's next cartoon appearance was in Transformers Energon, where she has shed her quote-unquote girl archetype, but she's still not much of a character. Though, to be fair, few characters in Energon were much of a character, and those that were absolutely sucked. So this isn't a point against Arcee, but one against Energon as a whole. Her next appearance was in Transformers Animated, where she also isn't much of a character. In this case, she's a plot device. Arcee in this show exists for the sole purpose of advancing Ratchet's character. Arcee in this show exists for the sole purpose of advancing Ratchet's character, which in turn advances the Omega Supreme plot. So while she is a vital piece of the puzzle, she is not a character in and of herself. She has few moments of lucidity, and the ones she has are brief. In a vacuum, this isn't necessarily a problem. Uncle Ben is a plot device, Krypton is a plot device, the Waynes are a plot device, Monk Gyatso is a plot device. The only problem here is that this is the third Arcee in a row with little to no character, and she's not going to be the last. Arcee makes an appearance in Revenge of the Fallen, and much like in Energon, she has no character to speak of. Again, this is more a mark against the movies themselves than the character, but that's 4 now. Arcee made limited appearances in the comics, as then lead writer Simon Furman had a deep hatred for the concept of female Transformers. This hatred was so intense that when he did inevitably put Arcee in the IDW continuity, he gave her an incredibly messed up backstory where she and all other fembots were once male-presenting, and were forced to become feminine via the experimentations of G-Axis. This, understandably, ticked off a lot of people. Both longtime fans of the characters and members of the LGBT community, especially the trans community. While this would later be retconned into being Arcee's choice, it still left a bad taste in many people's mouths. It also didn't help that IDW Arcee was a particularly vicious character, on par with Optimus Prime in the later Bay films. She was simply unenjoyable to read about, and was seen by some as a harmful stereotype, considering her backstory. As we can see here, Arcee, while being a staple of the franchise, has kind of a rocky history. From being a pure stereotype to a non-character twice over, to a plot device, and finally to an incredibly controversial and uncomfortable mess, one begins to wonder if Arcee is actually liked for her character, or for the idea of her character. Fortunately, in 2010, the franchise's most popular fembot was given a much-needed overhaul. Transformers Prime came out in between the second and third films in the Bayverse franchise and was intended to be a rather interesting concept. A bridge between the more cartoony elements of Generation 1, the Unicron trilogy and animated, and the more grounded and realistic films. As such, characters such as Optimus Prime, Megatron, Starscream, and Soundwave resembled a combination of their cartoon and film counterparts. Others, like Ratchet and Bulkhead, took their prior cartoon designs and made them look more mechanical, while some, like Bumblebee, were more of a total spin-off of solely the film design. Arcee is one of a handful that were given a complete overhaul. Gone was the bright pink audiences had come to know, the last vestige of it remaining as highlights for the now dominant blue. An interesting choice, all things considered. Never before had Arcee been blue with pink highlights, let alone had any blue in her. And yet, for the kind of show Prime was, it worked. All the other characters had their colors muted slightly. Optimus was almost maroon, with his blue parts being navy. Bumblebee was more of a goldenrod than bright yellow. Starscream's red and blue were significantly lessened, and his gray became more predominant in his robot mode as well as his jet mode. Soundwave was now dark blue with none of the white and gold highlights he usually sported. And Megatron was now gray with dark purple highlights, eschewing the red that usually adorns his more G1-inspired designs. Pink is a more difficult color than others to tone down. It's definitely possible, but more difficult than reds, blues, yellows, greens, or purples. Perhaps the creators thought it easier to completely change Arcee's color scheme than to try and make the pink look menacing. Additionally, as Arcee was partnered with Jack, the male human lead of the show, a pink motorcycle would look a bit odd. Now, in real life, a guy with a pink motorcycle isn't weird at all, some guys just like pink, but in a cartoon, it can look a tad silly. However, changing Arcee's color scheme was not the only change. Her look was completely overhauled. She was made sleeker and given more of a pointy look than before, what with the fins on her back, spiked knees and feet, and the crust on her head. Clearly the designers wanted Arcee to look dangerous, and dangerous she was. Perhaps the most dangerous of the Autobot lineup. Though she was small, she regularly tangled with bots 2 to 3 times her size and usually won, with only Megatron and Soundwave ever causing her significant trouble. Physical trouble, at least. There was one who dealt quite a bit of emotional damage to her, but we'll get there when we get there. Even Shockwave fell victim to Arcee's skill with a blaster, as she blinded him in his first appearance in the show. And, for the first time in her television appearances, Arcee had a personality that wasn't girl, or worse, background character. This version of the character is fierce, loyal, solitary, sarcastic, strong-willed, short-tempered, intelligent, protective, tragic, and a bit of a softie once you break down her walls. She's perhaps the most dynamic Autobot character aside from Wheeljack and Smokescreen, only really rivaled by Decepticons like Megatron, Starscream, and Dreadwing in terms of depth. Even Optimus, who I say isn't as boring as some believe, has far less dynamo than Arcee. But what exactly is it that makes this version of the character so fascinating? In my opinion, there are three things. First, background. Every good hero undergoes some form of tragedy that shapes their story, be it Luke Skywalker losing his aunt, uncle, and mentor all in one day, Spider-Man unintentionally causing the death of Uncle Ben, Batman watching his parents be put down in an alley, Aang outliving his entire culture, or Frodo being subjected to the corruption of Sauron hanging around his neck. Arcee is no different. In the first episode of the series, Arcee loses her longtime partner and implied romantic interest, Cliffjumper, to Starscream. Losing Cliff sets Arcee down a trajectory. In the first few episodes and much of the first season, she is rather closed off, not truly allowing herself to get close to anyone, even her teammates. We soon learn that Cliffjumper is not the first person she's lost, however. Back on Cybertron, Arcee was in a pretty similar relationship with an Autobot named Tailgate. Whether they were simply close friends and partners, or were also romantically involved, is never clarified. However, losing a friend is no less difficult than losing a love. In a vital scouting mission, Arcee was captured by the sadistic Decepticon interrogator known as Arachnid. The Spider-Con wanted to know the coordinates of an approaching Autobot attack, and tortured Arcee for the information. However, Arcee either did not know, or was strong-willed enough to not break under the torture. The episode doesn't really make it clear. In order to force a confession, Arachnid brought in a heavily damaged Tailgate, who she killed to break Arcee's mind. Before the interrogation could continue past that, however, Arcee was rescued by Bumblebee and her future partner, Cliffjumper. That day lived rent-free in Arcee's mind for the rest of her life, and she became a loner from that day on. It wasn't until escaping from the clutches of Shockwave and Starscream and arriving on Earth that Arcee was willing to work with another Autobot, namely, Cliffjumper. The two of them worked side by side throughout the war on Earth up until the Decepticons went into hiding. 3 years later, while scouting for Energon, Cliffjumper was ambushed by Vehicons and executed by Starscream. Having now lost two partners, Arcee became even more closed off than before. She also became vengeful, at first against Arachnid and later against Starscream, once she learned of his involvement in Cliff's demise. Her later partnerships with Jack and Smokescreen started off far more distant than her previous ones, as she sought to keep everyone at arm's length to avoid more tragedy. Yet the standoffishness didn't remain for long. Second, how her background defines her as a character. As mentioned, she was initially distant from Cliff, then Jack, and then Smokescreen. The more partners she lost, the more protective she became. In the episode Predatory, Arachnid's introduction, Arcee demonstrates just how fierce of a protector she is with Jack, and she continues to demonstrate that characteristic throughout the show. With Jack, with Smokescreen, with Bulkhead, even with other human characters like Miko, Raph, and June. While her tragedy certainly brought out negative aspects of Arcee's character, it also brought out very noble ones. Arcee is almost as self-sacrificing as Optimus in the way she defends people. Speaking of those negative traits, however, Arcee's vengeful streak often puts herself in more danger than it needs to. Whenever Arachnid is on the battlefield, Arcee races ahead of everyone else to try and kill her hated enemy. Yet while Arcee sometimes gains the physical upper hand in these fights, her irrationality allows Arachnid to win 9 times out of 10. Requiring Arcee to be saved by Optimus, Jack, Bulkhead, and even her other hated foe, Starscream, who hates Arachnid more than he does Arcee. Almost as much as he hates Megatron. Speaking of Starscream, Arcee nearly crossed a line in late Season 1, when she had an injured Starscream at her mercy. Killing enemies is expected in a war, but execution is more gray. Optimus was going to execute Megatron in the G1 movie, and though I did alter it in my rewrite, executing Sentinel in Dark of the Moon never bothered me. The way he took out Megatron did, but that's another topic entirely. But Optimus has something that Arcee doesn't. Authority. He's the leader of the Autobots, and as such has the authority to carry out or sentence executions. In both instances, also, Optimus's intent was to remove a threat. Megatron had personally and indirectly killed many Autobots in that G1 movie, and Sentinel was a traitor. The penalty for both is death. But Optimus had decreed that Starscream was to live. Arcee disobeyed orders, put herself in danger, and nearly acted like a Decepticon, seeking to kill Starscream purely out of vengeance. It was only Bumblebee's look of concern that stayed her blade. Scenes like this show the complexity of Arcee. She has a darkness in her, though she isn't a bad person. Robot. We see that darkness again in Stronger Faster, where after a juiced-up Ratchet makes an insensitive comment about Cliffjumper's death, Arcee nearly attacks him. Yet these negative traits are tempered over time. Third, how she grows. Part of why Arcee is such a compelling character in Prime is that she's not static. One of my biggest criticisms of Season 3 is how Bulkhead, Optimus, and Bumblebee, until the finale, become stunted in their character growth. We saw Optimus on a bit of a vengeful, decisive streak throughout Season 2, but he reverts back to early Season 1 Optimus after his reconstruction. Bulkhead's war wounds and feelings of inadequacy are forgotten, and until his resurrection in Deadlock, Bumblebee's anger at Megatron is ignored. Even Ratchet, who had a compelling arc in the first 4 episodes of Beast Hunters, just kinda reverts after the Autobots are reunited. Only Smokescreen, Wheeljack, Arcee, and new arrival Ultra Magnus really have compelling stories in the Autobot cast. The Decepticons are as good as ever, though. They're easily the best part of Season 3. With Arcee, though, Season 3 is when she's been fully tempered. In Season 1, Arcee was angry, solitary, and standoffish. In Season 2, she still had some anger, but she was more of a team player. She also took on more of a mentor role, specifically for Smokescreen, and demonstrated a love and concern for humanity that she didn't have before. Kind of like Ratchet, but less dramatic. She also mentors Miko through Bulkhead's injury arc. We see the seeds of this mentor role in the end of Season 1, where she counsels Bumblebee after Wrath is wounded by Megatron. She's also finally able to best Arachnid, tricking her into a stasis pod and gaining some form of closure for Tailgate's death. And Cliff's death a little bit through talking to Miko. And in Season 3, Arcee's the only one willing to understand Wheeljack, who has felt like a bit of an outsider ever since landing on Earth. As a lone wolf herself, Arcee gets the Wrecker and is able to counsel him. She continues being a mentor to Jack and Smokescreen, recognizing that Smokescreen has grown rather swiftly, and expressing admiration for the young bot, where before she had little more than annoyance. And by show's end, she's mostly smoothed out her rough edges. We see her go from a battle-weary, revenge-fueled loner to a fierce and loyal protector, and then to a teacher and friend. Optimus said in the episode Partners, the very same episode where Arcee nearly killed Starscream, that wisdom cannot be granted, it must be earned. It would seem that Arcee took that message to heart, as her wisdom, that she had earned, proved helpful for many of her teammates as the show went on. I'm rather disappointed that RID-15 did nothing with Arcee, as I would have loved to have seen her in more of a mentor-type role. Of course, that being said, RID-15 sucked anyway, so it's probably a good thing that it didn't touch Arcee outside of a cameo. One criticism I have seen from detractors of Transformers Prime, people whose opinions I honestly have little respect for, is that Arcee is just Chromia with a new name. She's blue, she's a warrior, she's reckless, etc. I completely disagree with this take. Foremost, different shades of blue, though that's a bit of a pedantic rebuttal. On a more serious note, they have plenty of differences. For one, Chromia is more like the female Ironhide. She's tough, no nonsense, definitely reckless, and keen on demolitions. Arcee is usually cautious. Usually. Only allowing herself to be reckless when overwhelmed by anger or desperation. Arachnid, pretty much. If anything, she gets mad at other Autobots, such as Smokescreen, for their recklessness. She's also more of a fan of fast, sneaky attacks than blowing things up. The biggest real similarities the two have is that neither of them are particularly social, but neither are Ratchet or Optimus, so this argument kind of falls flat. I can see where the critics are coming from, as there's definitely some surface-level similarities, but I genuinely have to ask, if Arcee was pink, would anyone be comparing her to Chromia? I doubt it. As mentioned earlier, Arcee had little character to speak of in past iterations, so we can't really say that this version is inaccurate to her prior character. Any comparisons lie solely in the fact that they share a color scheme, especially as versions of Arcee that have followed this one, such as Skybound and Rise of the Beasts, have maintained a similar persona while reverting to a more classic color scheme. Of course, unfortunately Rise of the Beasts didn't go further than Persona, but that's a video for another time. The creators of Transformers Prime took an iconic character who had little in the way of actual, character, and turned her into arguably the star of the show. She's a tragic character, one with a dark side, but also a fierce protector and loyal comrade who eventually gains wisdom and overcomes her darkness, becoming a teacher and counselor to those in need of guidance. For these reasons, Transformers Prime has what is, in my opinion, the best version of Arcee. As always, thank you all for joining me on my quest. If you enjoyed the video and like what I do here, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to support the channel further, please consider joining the Knights Realm Patreon for $1 a month, and get access to exclusive content, including videos not available on YouTube and supercuts of my rewrites. Or if you'd like to request a future video topic or vote on pre-chosen topics, you can join at $5 a month or leave a super thanks in the comments below. Before I close out here, I'd like to give a Patreon shout out. Thanks to Ba Loser, SK, and Jacob Sheets for subscribing to my Patreon. In any case, I will see you all on our next adventure, whenever that may be.